I want to do the impossible. I want to teach you how you can become a better fursuit maker. Hi, my name is Waffles, and I'm going to break down the secrets that pro fursuit makers use in order to build a better costume. In order to do that, I've created a list of 5 different things that you can do right now to help improve your own fursuit making ability. Have you ever had the issue where you're making something and it just doesn't quite look right? Bad shapes might be the answer. The first trick that separates the pros from the amateurs is shape language. Good fursuit makers use shapes to tell a story with their characters. Take the foam base for example. It's one of the hardest parts to make because you're taking flat 2D foam and turning it into a complex 3D sculpture. If you spend time planning out your shapes, you can create a character from the very beginning and give it a way more personality. Take this fursuit head base created by Owen as an example. If you look just at the shapes alone, what does this tell you about the character? Its personality, how it might act, what it might say, all sorts of things can be gleaned just from the way shapes are used when creating the base. It's shape language that helps tell a story and develops the personality of the character. Think about how Disney designs a character. All of these character design principles still apply with fursuit making, and it's how you can build way more character into your characters. When you're first getting started, find fursuit makers you like and practice breaking down their shapes. It's only after you spend time observing can you really get an understanding of something. Now, what if you want an easier solution? Fursuits has one of my favorite patterns that you can use to put together your own fursuit head. Using a pattern turns this daunting process into something more like putting together a Lego set. Another option is to use a 3D printed base. These are plastic kits you put together to give you a great starting point. Remember these tips when creating your own shapes. You never want to be randomly adding foam to the head. Instead, each piece should do something. Always keep it simple, and remember to plan out your shapes before cutting your foam. Just adding foam randomly to the head won't work. The second tip that's essential in fursuit building is quality. To be clear, I'm talking less about the abstract idea of quality, and instead the real, practical things that you can do to improve your artwork. For example, symmetry. Symmetry is one of the easiest measures of quality in a fursuit. Simply put, does everything line up? Take for example, this masterfully done cheetah created by the fursuit maker, Solixer. If you draw a line connecting the ears together, does everything line up on the head? What about for the eyes or the nose? Having a symmetrical face is something that our squishy human brains use to help define beauty. Being able to pull this off at this level of quality is something that's a surefire way to help you make better fursuits. Another example of quality in fursuit making is clean edge work. In the same way a messy sketch can distract from a drawing, messy edges can distract from your fursuit. Consider the case of cutting out foam. Clean cuts from a sharp knife will produce much better edge work than a block of foam that's been attacked by a weed eater. And it's not just foam. Do you really want to cut out your expensive luxury fur with a dull knife? Having clean edges shows confidence in your work and the quality shines through to the final product. My last practical tip for improving the quality of your work is to practice making multiples of something. Consider the case of making 24 claws for your fursuit. Sure, anyone can make 1 or 2 nice ones, but a professional can make a whole bunch of them identically. Some of my final thoughts to sum all this up. Practice symmetry in your artwork and make sure that everything is lined up. Have confidence in yourself and create edges with a purpose. Always remember, sucking at something is the first step to getting good. Now, before I share with you what I consider to be the most essential fursuit making tools, it's time for the mid-video secret call out. These videos always take a long time to produce, but I try to make them at least informative and educational. If you found this video useful at all, I ask that you please like the video and just check to see if you're subscribed. Liking this video helps boost it in the algorithm, and if you've gotten any value out of it, I think it's a pretty fair trade. My name is Waffles, and I've been a furry artist for many years now, and my goal has always been to uplift the people around me by sharing what I consider to be the secrets of fursuit making. Now, I'd like to share with you what I consider to be the essential mix of fursuit making tools. These are, if I was a brand new fursuit maker, what I would purchase first before buying anything else. Let's just go through them one at a time, starting with one of my all-time favorites, the craft knife. I've talked about this before, you guys know I love it. It's a really sharp knife that has specifically a blade that has little indents in it, so you can just break them off and get like a brand new super sharp tip. Having a sharp knife makes making a fursuit so much easier, and there are a ton of different brands out there. This one is specifically like an Awfully. It's a Japanese cheap box cutter. There are a ton of them out there. I like this one a lot. Get yourself a sharp knife, and specifically one with a little break-off tip that you can use to make your knife always super sharp. All-time classic, one of my favorites. Now, if we're talking about bread and butter of making fursuits, let's talk about scissors. I specifically like just using cheap, sharp fabric scissors, but there are a lot of different options out there. The one thing I would not recommend are getting very expensive fabric scissors because they're only really used for fabric, and I often use these scissors for cutting just about everything. It's nice to have a pair of scissors that you can use to just kind of like chop up stuff and break them in and use them nice. So scissors, absolutely essential. Get yourself a nice pair. Next, let's talk about needle nose pliers. I don't see a lot of other fursuit makers talk about these, but they're one of my most used tools, and I consider them to be pretty much essential. They're spring-loaded, so that means whenever you click them, they pop right back. They have a little knife in here for snipping the ends of stuff, and they're super grippy for grabbing very hard to get things. So many little things are way easier when you have a pair of needle nose pliers. Next up, let's talk about the Humble Sharpie, definitely something that I consider to be basically essential. I specifically like the clicky version that has a little button, just because I'm always losing the tip. Get yourself like a 10-pack of these, scatter them throughout your entire life. They make things a lot easier. I use them to mark foam, fur, fabric, whatever I can get my hands on. They're nice, they're useful, you already know about them. Get yourself a Sharpie. Next up, I have what I've always called a pair of snips, and that's just, again, a spring-loaded pair of scissors that are specifically designed for sewing. All spring-loaded tools are S tier, in my opinion, so I highly recommend that. And if you have to do a ton of repetitive like snipping, these are way nicer than like a big pair of shears that you have to like get your hand in and pick up and put down, when these are just like one-handed, quick, easy snips. Next, let's talk about a hot glue gun. If you don't know, fursuits are like 85% hot glue, and then like the rest of it is just random fabric. You can use whatever you have laying around. Even the little small hot glue guns, they'll work perfectly fine, especially if like a partial. But if you upgrade anything soon, the hot glue gun should be one of the first. I have specifically a bigger one that uses the big fat hot glue strips. That's just to make it last a lot longer, but it's definitely an essential tool, and you'll find yourself using it for basically everything on a fursuit. Now, there's one last item that's absolutely essential, and that's, if you can see it here, a needle and thread. If you want to build a fursuit, you have to know how to hand sew. Good news if you don't though, you're on YouTube where you can learn just about everything. Learning to hand sew is an essential skill for making a fursuit, and you can learn it in probably about an afternoon with just a basic stitch. So these right here are what I consider to be the essential mix when it comes to fursuit making tools. Now, let's talk about some upgrades and some nice to haves. The next set of items I want to talk about aren't necessarily essential, but they do make your life a lot easier. The first one I want to talk about is just plain newsprint paper. This is just cheap, disposable paper that's excellent for like pattern making or templates or just proof of concepts, stuff like that where you want to make a quick and dirty copy of something. Newsprint's always coming in handy, and it helps to have a whole bunch of it just laying around. The next item are various fasteners. I use two primarily. The first one are what I like to call bulldog clips, and they're just little plastic snips like this that work great for like holding the ends of fur shot or fabric. Anytime you have to do a lot of sewing involving fabric, these work excellent. And then I also have regular sewing pins like this that aren't as good to use, but if you want to hold like foam together or any sort of like EVA stuff, these are way more useful. So it helps to have both, just because they do make your life way easier. The next thing I have is a seam ripper, and if you've never used one of these before, they're basically the undo button of fursuit making. All you do is you have your sewing seam, and then you can stick the two prongs between it and just rip it all open. Now, these aren't super needed, especially if you have a nice sharp craft knife, but if you do have a sewing machine, this makes undoing sewing seams much easier. It's always better to have one and not need it, as opposed to needing one and not having one. The next item on my list is just a plain white charcoal pencil. I specifically use this for marking the back of dark brown and black fur. There are a lot of fabric markers out there, and they honestly all suck. Charcoal pencils work the best. They're easy, they're not messy, they won't get paint everywhere. And I found that for writing on the backs of dark colored fur, this works by far the best, and it's also the cheapest. So get yourself a white charcoal pencil if you plan on working with any sort of dark colored fur. The next item I want to talk about is just a regular hair clipper. This is specifically like a cheap Amazon pet clipper that I use to shorten the length of fur. So if you think about it, like the fur on the face of a fursuit is going to be much shorter than the fur on like the bodysuit. This is how I achieve that effect. Now, A lot of people have questions on what type of clippers to get. I've always had a lot of success with just cheap, really crappy basic ones, but that's just me. Some people swear by certain brands, but for me personally, I've never had an issue with the cheapo ones. So get whatever you use, just make sure you use it. And if you're gonna do lots of shaving of fur, I highly recommend getting a respirator. We all know there's a ton of plastic at the bottom of the ocean, but there's almost certainly more plastic on the inside of the lungs of a fursuit maker. Protect yourself. If you're going to use like strong adhesives or paints or glues, a respirator protects yourself and can make those tiny shards of plastic that fly in the air when you're shaving it all just not go inside of your body. Highly recommend it. Also true if you're doing lots of hand sewing. Get yourself a wrist strap to help protect yourself from repetitive strain injury. They're just great tools to help protect your body from these kind of like repetitive motions over and over and over again. But yeah, so these are all my nice to have items. Now let's talk about the not needed but very fun upgrades. When it comes to fursuit making tool upgrades, I only have 2 items for you, but they're both big and they're both bangers. The first up is a sewing machine. Now, like I said earlier, you don't need a sewing machine, but if you plan on building like a full suit or like a digigrade legs or a plush suit or anything that's way more big and involved, you're gonna have to get one of these eventually. This one in particular is a Singer Model 4411. It's basically like the default furry sewing machine. It's great for heavy fabrics like fur, it's fairly affordable, and you can buy them used for kind of cheap. The reason why sewing machines are so good is that oftentimes time is your limiting factor when it comes to fursuit making, and a sewing machine can significantly speed up the slowest part of the process, which is just tons and tons of hand sewing. Really, as you get more advanced, you should be using the sewing machine for basically everything, but if you're just starting out, you don't really need it, especially if you're only building a partial. Learn to hand sew first, and then once you have that mastered, get a sewing machine. Now, the next item is probably the item I get more questions about than anything else I have, and that's my mannequin head. This particularly is a Monster Maker Ed head, and I'll put a link down to it below. But basically, it is a mannequin head that you can use like a third hand when you put the fursuit head on it. Just like with this guy here, you can just plop them on top and then you can do all of your sculpting and modeling while not having to worry about holding it or anything like that. It's not needed, but once you have one, you definitely can't go back. I've seen a lot of people try to talk about the styrofoam ones that you can get really cheap. Don't waste your time with them. They really suck, they don't hold up, and they tend to fall apart, and you're just gonna end up wasting your time and money. These are the items here that I consider to be kind of the essential furry making tools, and I've tried to cover basically everything I use for building a fursuit. The next hidden secret of professional fursuit making is by far the most overlooked: project management. Okay, I know no one wants to hear about project management, but what if I told you it can make making a fursuit a lot easier? If you're like most normal people, then you already have way too many things going on. Work, school, family, friends. It's a lot already, and trying to find time to squeeze in building a costume is hard. My advice: break down making a fursuit into as many small tasks as you can. For example, building a finished head in one day is basically impossible. Instead, go feral and start taking bite-sized chunks out of it. Creating a pattern, cutting out the foam, gluing everything together are just 3 examples of smaller tasks that you could do. The average fursuit from a newer maker takes around 6 months to build. It's no small undertaking. What works best for me is breaking everything down into about 2-hour chunks. 2 hours is the perfect amount of time to really sink your teeth into something without the risk of getting burnt out. Here are some of my favorite tips for the process of creating a fursuit. Start simple. If you've never made a fursuit before, start with a classic red box instead of that digigrade sparkle dog you're dreaming of. Keep your tasks small. Taping up the head? Yep, that's a task. Cutting out some fur? That's a task. Cleaning up your workspace when you're done? Damn right, that's a task too. You want to get some wins under your belt because it really helps build up the project and yourself at the same time. Finding the balance between work and life is challenging, and you'll just have to figure out what works best for you. Hopefully though, these tips will smooth out one of the most overlooked aspects of building a fursuit. So far, we've talked about 4 important aspects when making a fursuit: shape design, quality, tools, and actually planning out your project. But you're probably a smart viewer and you'd notice that at the very beginning of this video, I actually promised 5 tips. That's because the last tip is by far the most important, and that's to enjoy yourself while making a fursuit. Enjoy yourself as you create something new and see yourself overcome challenges. Enjoy taking on projects that are too large, you're not sure you're even going to be able to finish them. And finally, enjoy overcoming your obstacles and seeing the final results. With all that being said, thank you, and I can't wait to see you guys again soon. Before the video ends, I wanted to give you a quick Protogen update. The progress on the Protogen has been very successful. Currently, I'm working on the armor, and the next video that you see of the Protogen will be like a big reveal for all of the armor pieces. You won't miss anything. I'll tell you all the secrets, all the cool stuff, and I'll tease it just a little bit. This is the current chest piece, so you can see a ton of work's been going into it, and the results are gonna be really cool. So if you have any questions about that, or you want more Fursuit updates, join the Discord. The Discord's been popping off lately. Lots of cool people in there. It's been really successful. Thank you guys again. Thank you, and I'll see you guys again soon.